Casey Anthony is back in the spotlight nearly 14 years after her toddler daughter Caylee was found dead. The Florida mother was acquitted of murder charges back in July.
Hello, and welcome to Crime Time with the EZ. Yes, the King, where we turn criminals into the roaches that they are, and then stomp on them, or make them disappear. Shit. Okay, now, awkward pause as I try to recover and pretend that didn't happen. Anywho.
In 2008, a case that would captivate the nation's attention unfolded in Orlando, Florida. The disappearance of 2-year-old Caylee Anthony sent shockwaves through the country, and the subsequent trial of her mother, Casey Anthony, became a media sensation. In this video, we'll delve into the perplexing, mysterious case of Casey Anthony, providing a detailed timeline of events, exploring the evidence, and examining the controversial verdict that left many puzzled and outraged. Our story begins on June 15, 2008, when Cindy Anthony, the grandmother of Caylee Anthony, made a frantic 911 call to report her granddaughter missing. She told the dispatcher that she hadn't seen Caylee for 31 days and that her daughter, Casey Anthony, had given her various excuses for her absence. 1 month later, on July 15, 2008, Casey Anthony was arrested on charges of child neglect, providing false statements to law enforcement, and obstruction of a criminal investigation. During this time, the search for Caylee intensified. It wasn't until December 11, 2008, that the case took a grim turn. A utility worker stumbled upon a child's remains in a wooded area less than a mile from the Anthony family home. Tragically, these remains were later confirmed to be those of Caylee Anthony. Casey Anthony's trial began on October 14, 2008. She was charged with first-degree murder, aggravated manslaughter of a child, aggravated child abuse, and 4 counts of providing false information to law enforcement. The prosecution argued that Casey had intentionally killed her daughter and tried to cover it up. The prosecution presented a timeline that suggested Casey Anthony used chloroform to render her daughter unconscious, placed duct tape over her mouth and nose, and disposed of her body in the woods. They painted Casey as a party-going mother who showed no signs of remorse or concern for her missing child. In contrast, the defense argued that Caylee accidentally drowned in the family pool on June 16, 2008. They contended that Casey's dysfunctional upbringing had led her to cope with trauma by lying and creating a fictional story about a nanny kidnapping Caylee. The trial lasted for 6 weeks and, on July 5, 2011, the jury delivered their verdict. To the shock of many, Casey Anthony was acquitted of the murder charges. She was found guilty of providing false information to law enforcement, receiving a 4-year sentence, but with time served in good behavior, she was released on July 17, 2011. Casey Anthony's acquittal was met with widespread controversy and public outrage. Many believed that justice had not been served, and they were left questioning the legal system. Since her release, Casey Anthony has largely remained out of the public eye. She has faced significant public scrutiny, with her whereabouts and life kept under tight wraps. The case of Casey Anthony remains one of the most perplexing and polarizing criminal trials in recent history. It raises questions about the effectiveness of the justice system and the power of public opinion. Regardless of one's stance on the case, it serves as a reminder that sometimes, even in the pursuit of justice, the truth can be elusive, and the outcome can leave us with more questions than answers.
A major story out of Florida, the verdict in the Casey Anthony case. Casey Anthony found not guilty of murdering her daughter, Caylee Anthony, 3 years ago.
As to count 1, we, the jury, find the defendant not guilty, so say we all, dated at Orlando.
But it was a verdict that really stunned the country, it seemed like.
It felt like Twitter and Facebook completely exploded with reactions. Everyone was, very heavily invested in this trial, and they had a very personal response to the outcome.
It seems like a lot of people did assume that there was some guilt here and were rooting for some sort of verdict. And I have to wonder if we're moving into an age now where what we see on television, what we see online is driven by what people are saying on Twitter and Facebook.
So in the past, we would have read about the story in the paper and then, talked about it at home over dinner or the next morning around the water cooler. And now we can sort of turn to Twitter or turn to Facebook and talk about it instantaneously, dissect the details of the case, form our own opinions, and toss them back out on the web.
Yeah, people have been calling this for weeks now the first trial of the social media age. I think because it's so relatable, because it's about parenting, it's about taking care of children or not taking care of your children. And I noticed on Twitter almost all the top 10 trending topics are about the case. People clearly deeply invested in this trial.
One of the big questions that's been tossed around on Twitter is whether or not, the Casey Anthony trial is to social media what the O.J. Simpson trial was for cable television. It's this big watershed moment where, sort of at the center of the case and is this platform, is the web. It is social media and Twitter. I mean, it's sort of what we're using to discuss and turn over the case in real time.
Casey Anthony is back in the spotlight nearly 14 years after her toddler daughter, Caylee, was found dead. The Florida mother was acquitted of murder charges back in July of 2011. A new docuseries claims to take a closer look at her side of the story, and it will be released at the end of this month. Our next guest was actually invited to be part of this interview and declined. Fox Nation host Nancy Grace joins us now. Good morning, Nancy. Why did you decide not to take part in the docuseries?
The first one thing I want to say is duct tape. Duct tape. Wrapped 3 times around a 2-year-old girl's head. That duct tape was found hanging off of Caylee's skull. That's one of the reasons I don't want to be part of such an interview, like I'm somehow condoning it. Condoning an airbrushed, digitized version of her truth. She says she's going to tell her truth. Her truth is very different from the truth. And I'm not convinced that somehow my questions would not be somehow manipulated. There is a reason Tot Mom Casey Anthony did not take the stand to tell her truth, because she could not weather or undergo or survive an intense cross-examination. In these conditions where you've got a producer fluffing you up and throwing you questions that you know are coming, they're softball questions, that's no cross-examination. Also, whatever we get is going to be nothing but a pack of lies, and I don't want to be part of that. The time she should have spoken, many would argue, is in court. I think she should have spoken when her daughter went missing. Never a public plea. She was not out looking for her. She told one lie after the next. Proven lies. Why? Because she killed her 2-year-old daughter. And one more thing, I've handled a lot of homicides and I've seen a lot of dead bodies, but there is nothing so repugnant, so repulsive as murdering a child. I don't want to be part of that.
Nancy, what happened to her? Where is she now? Did she ever become a mother again?
Well, she says she's open to having more children, but the only time she pops up on headlines is when she's in a bar fight with another woman over a man and drinks are slung, or at a bar in hot pants doing shots with guys. I mean, I'm not judging. I don't care what anybody does in a bar on their off time. None of my business. I care about a little dead girl thrown into a swamp about 10 houses down from the Anthony home. That's what I care about, with duct tape wrapped across her nose and mouth. And now she has a platform to spew another batch of lies? I don't condone that. I don't agree with that. It's wrong.
It's hard to imagine what that little girl went through as she took her final breath. Thank you so much, Nancy, for coming on. It'll be on the Peacock Network. Do you know when it airs? When does it start? The end of this month?
Are you asking me to give an ad?
Yeah,
but since you asked, I will tell you November 29.
Okay. Thanks, Nancy.
Casey Anthony is finally speaking out on the death of her daughter, Caylee, and she's placing the blame squarely on her father, George Anthony. In the 3-part docuseries, Casey Anthony, Where the Truth Lies, Casey tells her version of the events in her first on-camera sit-down interview. The 36-year-old became internationally famous in 2008 after the disappearance of her 2-year-old daughter, Caylee. 6 months after the girl vanished, her remains were found in a wooded area near the family home. Casey was charged with her daughter's murder. However, during her 2011 trial, her legal team argued that Caylee had drowned in the family pool. Casey was infamously acquitted of the murder charges in July of 2011, but she was convicted of 4 counts of providing false information to law enforcement and served prison time for those charges. During her sit-down interview, Casey drops several bombshells and elaborates on her allegations that she had been sexually abused by her father George and her brother Lee. Both men have vehemently denied those claims in court and have never been charged. Casey alleges that her father staged Caylee's drowning in order to cover up that he may have been abusing his granddaughter. She recounts the night her daughter went missing. She says that she wasn't feeling great, so she wanted to lie down in bed beside Caylee. She claims that she was awoken by George, who was asking her, "Where's Caylee?" Casey recalls being confused because she says Caylee would never leave her room without telling her. She goes on to claim that after she looked for her daughter in the house, she saw her father holding Caylee, who appeared to be all wet. She alleges that her father then handed her Caylee and told her that it was her fault. She also claims that he didn't resuscitate Caylee or rush to call 911. She then alleges that George took Caylee and then told her in a softened tone that it was going to be okay. Casey recalls that afterwards, she went on to stay with her then boyfriend, but she didn't tell anyone what had happened. She claims she wasn't under the impression that her daughter was dead. The new documentary, Casey Anthony, Where the Truth Lies, begins streaming November 29th on Peacock.
What did you think about the video? Please comment below, and please keep all involved in your prayers.
It's not a game, it's a